Gary, Indiana, February 13th, 1964. The auditorium of Roosevelt High School hummed with the nervous energy of an amateur talent show. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows were filled with parents, siblings, and neighbors who had come to support the local children brave enough to showcase their talents. The wooden stage, illuminated by a few modest spotlights, had already hosted a procession of young performers. Pianists with fumbling fingers, dancers with earnest, if imperfect, routines, and vocalists whose courage often exceeded their technical abilities. The judges, a panel of 3 local music teachers and the owner of Gary's only record store, maintained encouraging smiles throughout each performance, regardless of quality. This was, after all, about nurturing young talent, not crushing fragile dreams. Backstage, in the narrow corridor that served as the waiting area for performers, 6-year-old Michael Jackson stood perfectly still, his small frame almost vibrating with a combination of anticipation and terror. Unlike the other children, who fidgeted and chattered nervously with their parents, Michael remained silent, his large, expressive eyes taking in everything around him. His brothers, Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, and Marlon, surrounded him protectively, all of them dressed in matching homemade outfits sewn by their mother, Catherine. But it was their father, Joseph Jackson, whose presence dominated the cramped space. Joseph stood ramrod straight, his face a mask of determination and expectation. A factory worker by day and musician by night, he had been drilling his sons relentlessly for months, transforming their natural talents into a disciplined performance unit. The Jackson brothers, as they were then called, had performed at a few local venues, but this talent show represented a significant opportunity. The winner would receive not just a trophy, but a paid performance at the prestigious Club de Lisa in Chicago. For the Jackson family, struggling to make ends meet in Gary's industrial landscape, such an opportunity could be the first step towards something greater than their current circumstances. "Remember what I told you," Joseph said, his voice low but intense. "No mistakes." Not one. His eyes lingered on Michael, the youngest of the performing brothers. Despite his age, Michael had recently been moved from backing vocals to lead singer, his remarkable voice and natural performance instincts already evident even to Joseph's critical ear. But tonight's performance would present a unique challenge. During rehearsals at the school earlier that day, it had become apparent that the microphone stand, even at its lowest setting, was too tall for 6-year-old Michael to reach comfortably. The solution had been a simple wooden chair placed directly behind the microphone, allowing Michael to stand elevated while his brothers performed around him. It wasn't ideal. The chair restricted his movement and placed him somewhat awkwardly in the center of the group's formation, but there had been no time to find a better solution. "You'll have to be extra careful with the chair," Joseph continued, directing his words to Michael. "No moving around too much. Stay centered." Michael nodded solemnly, his eyes never leaving his father's face. Unlike many children his age, when Michael focused, he focused completely, a trait that both impressed and occasionally unsettled those around him. The intensity with which the 6-year-old absorbed instruction, the seriousness with which he approached his performances, seemed at odds with his tiny stature and cherubic face. "The Jackson brothers, you're on in 2 minutes," called the student volunteer managing the backstage area. Joseph gathered his sons into a tight circle, his final instructions delivered in a rapid, emphatic whisper. Then, with a nod toward the stage entrance, he stepped back, crossing his arms as he watched his sons file toward the stage. Michael, the smallest figure in the line, paused for just a moment before following his brothers. He glanced back at his father, received a stern nod of encouragement, then squared his small shoulders and walked with surprising dignity toward his destiny. On stage, as the previous act, a girl performing a respectable, if uninspiring flute solo, took her bow and exited to polite applause. The student MC stepped to the microphone. "Next up, we have a musical group from right here in Gary," he announced, consulting his note cards. "Please welcome the Jackson brothers." The curtain parted to reveal the 5 brothers already in position, for in a semicircle and little Michael standing on the wooden chair at center stage. directly behind a microphone that would have otherwise been at the level of his forehead. The audience's reaction was immediate and audible, a collective ah at the sight of the tiny performer elevated on his makeshift platform. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, not unkind, but certainly amused by the unusual accommodation. In the front row, the four judges exchanged glances that ranged from skeptical to openly doubtful. The sight of a 6-year-old standing on a chair did not inspire confidence in the technical quality they were about to witness. The backing track began, a raw, somewhat tinny recording of I Got the Feelin by James Brown, played through the school's modest sound system. The four older brothers began their synchronized movements, simplified versions of the complex footwork that characterized the soul performances of the era. Their energy was impressive, their commitment evident in every practice step, but all eyes in the auditorium remained fixed on the tiny figure standing on the chair. Michael stood completely still as the instrumental introduction played, his face composed in a mask of concentration that seemed impossibly mature for his years. His hands hung relaxed at his sides, his posture perfect, the result of countless hours of his father's strict training. Then, as the moment for the vocal to begin approached, something extraordinary happened. Like a switch being flipped, Michael's entire demeanor transformed. His serious expression gave way to a smile of such wattage that it seemed to physically brighten the modest spotlights. His body, previously still, became charged with an electric energy that was almost visible. And when he opened his mouth to sing, the voice that emerged was nothing short of astonishing. Baby, 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 oh baby. The sound filled the auditorium, causing several audience members to physically jerk in surprise. This was not the thin, uncertain voice of a child performer. This was not even the voice of a talented young singer. This was something else entirely, a voice with the power, control, and emotional depth of a seasoned performer, somehow emerging from the body of a 6-year-old boy standing on a wooden chair. The judges' reactions were immediate and unguarded. The record store owner's mouth literally dropped open. The music teachers exchanged glances of frank astonishment. One actually stood halfway out of her seat before seeming to recollect herself and sitting back down, her eyes never leaving the stage. But the transformation in Michael's voice was only the beginning. As he continued to sing, his entire body became an instrument of expression. Despite the precarious platform of the wooden chair, he began to move, not the random, energetic movements of a child at play, but precise, rhythmically perfect gestures that complemented his vocals with uncanny sophistication. His small hands punctuated phrases, his shoulders accented beats, his head tilted and swayed in perfect time to the music. Most remarkably, his facial expressions shifted and flowed with the emotional content of the lyrics. Joy, yearning, playfulness, intensity, each conveyed with a maturity and nuance that seemed impossible from a performer who had been alive for only 6 years. By the first chorus, the initial amusement of the audience had transformed into something approaching awe. Parents who had been casually watching now sat forward in their seats. Children who had been fidgeting were still, their attention captured completely by the phenomenon unfolding before them. Even the principal, standing at the back of the auditorium with his arms crossed, had uncrossed them, his expression one of frank amazement. On stage, Michael's brothers performed their choreography with energy and precision, but they might as well have been invisible. Every eye in the room was fixed on the small figure commanding the stage from his elevated perch. The wooden chair, initially an accommodation for his height, had become a throne, a platform that literally and figuratively elevated him above everyone else in the room. As the song progressed, Michael's confidence visibly grew. His movements became more expansive, his gestures more emphatic. The chair beneath him, initially a limitation, became incorporated into his performance, a prop that he used to frame and accent his movement rather than restrict it. There was a moment, during a particularly soulful passage, when he executed a perfect spin on the chair's surface, a maneuver that drew audible gasps from the audience, both for its technical difficulty and for the heart-stopping moment when it seemed the small performer might tumble from his precarious stage. But Michael completed the turn with perfect balance, never missing a note, his face a picture of focused joy rather than fear. In the front row, one of the judges, Mrs. Wilson, who had taught music at Roosevelt for over 30 years, began to cry. Not the polite, sentimental tears of an adult moved by a child's sweet performance, but the unguarded, almost bewildered tears of someone witnessing something they cannot fully comprehend, something that challenges their understanding of what is possible. As the song reached its climax, Michael's performance intensified further. His voice soared through the final chorus with a power that belied his tiny frame. His movements, while still mindful of the chair beneath him, took on an almost supernatural precision. Each gesture, each expression perfectly aligned with the music in a way that seemed both meticulously rehearsed and completely spontaneous. And then, for the final note, a sustained, powerful declaration that would have challenged singers 3 times his age, Michael dropped to his knees on the chair, one small hand raised toward the ceiling, head thrown back, voice ringing through the auditorium with flawless pitch and control. The note hung in the air for what seemed an impossibly long time, and when it finally faded, there was a moment of complete, stunned silence in the auditorium. That silence, the highest tribute an audience can pay to a performer, lasted for perhaps 3 full seconds. Then, like a dam breaking, the applause erupted. It wasn't the polite, encouraging applause that had followed the other children's performances. This was a spontaneous explosion of genuine amazement. The sound of an audience that has witnessed something so far beyond their expectations that they can respond in no other way. In the front row, all 4 judges were on their feet, the first to rise in what quickly became a standing ovation that encompassed the entire auditorium. Parents who had come to support other performers found themselves cheering for this remarkable child. Fellow contestants, who would normally view a stellar performance with competitive concern, stood open-mouthed in simple appreciation of what they had just witnessed. On stage, Michael's brothers grinned with evident pride, their own considerable talents momentarily overshadowed by the supernova in their midst. And Michael himself, as the applause washed over him in waves, underwent another transformation, from the confident, almost otherworldly performer back to a 6-year-old boy, suddenly shy in the face of such overwhelming response. He ducked his head, a small, uncertain smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he looked to his brothers for reassurance. In that moment, the dual nature that would define Michael Jackson throughout his career was already apparent. The seamless ability to transform from transcendent performer to vulnerable child and back again, each aspect as genuine as the other. As the applause continued unabated, the student MC approached the stage, clearly uncertain how to proceed in the face of such an extraordinary reaction. The talent show had a strict schedule to maintain, but interrupting this moment felt almost sacrilegious. Eventually, as the applause finally began to subside, he stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice reflecting the same amazement visible on every face in the auditorium, "the Jackson brothers." This announcement triggered another wave of applause, during which Michael carefully stepped down from his chair with the help of his oldest brother, Jackie. The 5 brothers lined up at the front of the stage and took a synchronized bow, a polished, professional gesture that seemed to underscore the seriousness with which they approached their craft, even at such young ages. As they exited the stage, Mrs. Wilson, the music teacher who had been moved to tears, rose from the judges' table and approached them before they could disappear behind the curtain. What she said wasn't audible to the audience, but those close enough could see her kneel down to Michael's level, take his small hands in hers, and speak to him with an expression of profound emotion. Whatever her words, they caused the small boy's face to break into a smile of genuine delight. Not the practiced performance smile of moments before, but the unguarded joy of a child receiving sincere praise. The rest of the talent show proceeded according to schedule, but there was a palpable sense that the emotional peak of the evening had already been reached. The subsequent performers, many of them talented in their own right, found themselves playing to an audience still processing what they had witnessed earlier. A 6-year-old boy who had needed a chair to reach the microphone, but who had somehow managed to touch something profound and universal within everyone present. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more moments that define the king of pop's extraordinary journey. The judges' deliberation was the shortest in the history of the Roosevelt High School talent show. There was no discussion, no weighing of different performances against each other. The decision was unanimous and immediate. When the participants were called back to the stage for the announcement of the winners, there was an atmosphere of formality but no suspense. Everyone in the auditorium already knew what was about to happen. The winner of this year's Roosevelt High School talent show announced the principal and recipient of the performance opportunity at Club de Lisa in Chicago, the Jackson brothers. The applause that followed was enthusiastic but not surprising. What was surprising, however, was what happened next. Mrs. Wilson stepped forward, taking the microphone from the principal. "I've been judging this talent show for 15 years, she said, her voice thick with emotion, and teaching music for over 30. What we witnessed tonight." She paused, clearly struggling to find adequate words. What we witnessed from young Michael Jackson wasn't just a talented child performing beyond his years. It was a glimpse of something extraordinary, a gift so rare that I believe we will all remember this night for the rest of our lives. She turned to face the 5 brothers standing center stage, focusing particularly on Michael, who stood slightly behind his older brothers, eyes wide with a mixture of pride and shyness. "You didn't just win a talent show tonight," she continued. "You showed us something about the limitless potential of the human spirit. That chair," she gestured to the wooden seat that had been Michael's platform, now sitting to the side of the stage, "that chair wasn't just a way for you to reach the microphone. It became a symbol of how even the youngest among us can rise above limitations and touch greatness." In the audience, Joseph Jackson sat perfectly still, his expression a complex mixture of pride, vindication, and something deeper, perhaps a dawning recognition of the true magnitude of what he had helped to cultivate in his youngest performing son. Beside him, Katherine Jackson wept quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face a portrait of maternal pride tempered with protective concern for her children's suddenly accelerating journey into the public eye. The Jackson brothers' performance at Club de Lisa the following weekend would become the stuff of local legend. Word had spread about the phenomenal young singer and his talented brothers, drawing a crowd that included not just family and friends from Gary, but music industry professionals from Chicago and beyond. Among them was a representative from Steeltown Records, a small local label, who had signed the brothers, now renamed the Jackson 5, to their first recording contract just months later. But for those who had been present in the Roosevelt High School auditorium on that February night in 1964, the memory that remained most vivid was not the beginning of what would become one of music's most legendary careers. It was the pure, unfiltered magic of watching a 6-year-old boy transform a humble wooden chair from a necessity into a stage from which he would begin his ascent to becoming the greatest entertainer of his generation. Years later, long after Michael Jackson had revolutionized popular music, after the moonwalk and Thriller and all the unprecedented achievements that would define his adult career, Mrs. Wilson, by then retired and in her 80s, would be interviewed for a documentary about the early days of the Jackson 5. "People always ask me if I knew then what he would become," she said, her eyes still bright with the memory despite the passage of decades. "And I always tell them the same thing. I didn't know what he would become, but I knew what he was even then. When that little boy stood on that chair and opened his mouth to sing, he wasn't just a child with a good voice. He was music itself, in its purest, most direct form." She smiled, lost for a moment in the memory of that transformation. A 6-year-old boy who needed a chair to reach the microphone, but whose talent had already soared far beyond the reach of any physical limitation. "The greatest performers," she continued, "don't just master technique or style. They become a channel for something larger than themselves, something universal that speaks directly to the heart." Michael had that quality at 6 years old. The chair just helped the rest of us see it more clearly. If you've been moved by this glimpse into the earliest days of Michael Jackson's extraordinary journey, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we keep alive the memory of not just what Michael Jackson became, but what he always was, a singular talent whose gift transcended age, era, and even understanding. In a small display case in the Michael Jackson Museum in Gary, Indiana, visitors can see a simple wooden chair, not the original from that fateful talent show, which has been lost to time, but one very similar, chosen to represent that pivotal moment. Beside it plays a continuous loop of rare footage showing 6-year-old Michael performing with his brothers in those early days. His voice and presence already unmistakable despite his tiny stature. Visitors often pause here longer than at more elaborate displays featuring the iconic costumes and memorabilia of his later career. There is something profoundly moving about this simple exhibit, about the visual reminder of how something as ordinary as a wooden chair became the first stage from which an extraordinary talent would begin to share his gift with the world. And in that simple object lies perhaps the most enduring lesson of Michael Jackson's remarkable life. That true greatness needs no elaborate platform, that authentic talent will find its way to expression even if it needs to stand on a chair to be seen and heard. The wooden chair that once elevated a 6-year-old boy to the height of a microphone became, in that transcendent moment, not a symbol of limitation, but of possibility. A reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys begin from the humblest of elevations.